So you've got a book about top tones for saxophone. You're saying this is tricky, so tricky that I'm not even going to tell you. That's the best bit of the whole book. Top tones, bro. Okay, saxophonists of the world, I'm going to make myself very unpopular today because I'm talking about this book. I'm sure you all know it. It's called Top Tones for the Saxophone by Sigurd Raschèr. And when anybody talks about altissimo, how do you play altissimo in saxophone? You know, you're met with the standard 3 words, top tones, bro, top tones. Okay, I'm going to talk about this book, the pros and the cons. First of all, a big caveat about this book. I don't want you to think in any way I'm criticizing Sigurd Raschèr, because he is undisputably one of the greatest saxophonists who have ever lived and ever will live, as demonstrated by clips like this. That said, if your goal is to learn how to play altissimo and saxophone, you're not going to get very far with this book, and I'll tell you why. Okay, first of all, this book is 23 pages long. I've got the 3rd edition here. Pages 6 to 10 are about getting a normal good tone and tone imagination. I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail. Pages 11 to 18 are all overtone exercises, which go on for pages and pages and pages. Sorry if that's a bit bright, my contrast. Now, it's not until you get to page 19 of the book, sorry, it's a little bit bright, where you get to the famous fingering chart. Now, when I was a kid and I got this book, this was the super exciting bit, because when I was learning saxophone, there was no online instruction like me. I didn't have me or anybody else like me. So I got to this fingering chart, which is overexposed, and that was very exciting times indeed. However, we'll talk about the fingerings later. Then, from pages 20 to 21, you've got a bunch of altissimo studies, which are just simple etudes and exercises up the octave. And from pages 22 to 23, you've got overtone scales, so more overtone stuff. That means that the entire book basically revolves around this one sheet where he gives the fingerings. Now, you might be asking, okay, how do I produce those notes? I'm using those fingerings, but I'm not getting the notes. Well, this is what we're about to go into. So let's back it up a little bit, shall we? And go to the foreword. Now, I'm going to read you some interesting stuff, because actually, Raschèr makes a lot of very interesting and valuable points about saxophone. I'm just saying that they're not necessarily going to help you very much playing altissimo. So, for example, in the foreword to the 1st edition, Rascher says, before beginning to study high tones, every saxophonist should be able to command and control completely the attack, quality and vibrato of every note within the normal range. Okay, that's a tall order. Therefore, this treatise, now this was in 1941, remember, this treatise begins with a few tone control exercises, which it is hoped will not be unfamiliar to the majority of saxophone players. So, fine. The 1st edition was in 1941, 2nd edition was in 1961, and the 3rd edition, which I've got, was in 1977. So this is an old school book, first of all. Right, then we go on, and you've got a series of tone exercises. Now, Rascher says, the purpose of this exercise, and it's a kind of chromatic, going up chromatically, tone exercise, long notes. The purpose of this exercise is to achieve uniformity of character and volume of every tone. So what he's really saying is, unless you can make a good sound in the normal range of the horn, don't even bother thinking about altissimo. Now that is actually quite a tall order. And these exercises, which involve things like dynamics, uniformity of tone, and all this stuff, go on for pages and pages. Then there's some interesting stuff in here about what he calls tone imagination. So he's kind of saying that if you can't think of the sound you want, you won't be able to produce it. I think that's a really awesome concept. But this goes on, and then there's more there's more exercises in fourths and fifths. Right, where are we now? We're now on to page 10. More exercises there. So, for example, some of the exercises here, I'll just play a little segment for you. This is on page 10. So on and so forth, it goes on. And these are all really valuable long note tone exercises. Then we get onto page 11. Nothing about altissimo yet. And he makes the really interesting observations about how you produce overtones on the horn. Okay, now this is the real crux of the book that most people probably don't even know, okay? So it's all about, your active mind. It's about using your mind. So we now proceed on to the part of the study where the effort spent on these exercises will bear fruit. And you're thinking, yes, let's go. The production of an overtone is the result of a delicately adjusted embouchure coupled with completely controlled flow of air. I'll say that again. The production of an overtone, that's when you finger a low note and, you have all the different harmonics, which is, the sort of stepping stone to altissimo. They're called long tube overtones. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. He says that the production of these overtones is the result of a delicately adjusted embouchure. How's delicately adjusted? How do you adjust it? Doesn't say. Coupled with a completely controlled flow of air. How do you control the flow of air? Doesn't say. Variations, this is the best bit. Variations of these two factors are so nimble that the author hesitates to define them. Variations of these two factors, which is delicately adjusted embouchure and controlled flow of air, are so nimble that the author hesitates to define them. So you've got a book about top tones for saxophone. You're saying this is tricky, so tricky that I'm not even going to tell you. That's the best bit of the whole book. Top tones, bro. Okay. However, I sort of get what he's talking about. And then the example he uses is, he says, the attempt to do so would be comparable to the admonition of the voice teacher: give 4 1/16 ounce of tension on the vocal cords, produce an outgoing flow of, blah, blah, blah. And he goes into all this technical stuff and he says that is an E. In other words, if I give you too many technical instructions, no one will understand it. Instead, he tries to give the student an accurate concept of the aimed for tone, the pitch and the quality of that note, which in turn influences below the level of consciousness, the action of the lungs, vocal cords, etc., resulting eventually in the production of the tone. Okay, so many people say to me, oh man, I cannot get the fourth overtone, let's say, to sound. What do I do? All right. Well, according to Rascher, you have to hear that note and the sound you're going for. And then below the level of your consciousness, you will influence the action of your lungs and vocal cords and, I guess, embouchure, which eventually will result in the tone. So if you came to me and I was your teacher and you said, hey, Jamie, I can't get the fourth overtone using a low B flat fingering, I would say to you, well, just hear it and, let it happen and it'll come out eventually. Is that good teaching? Is that okay? Is that cool? I don't think so. So this is where I make myself very unpopular, because there's actually a lot of truth to what he says. You do need to musically visualize strongly and hear the notes that you're going to produce on saxophone. And guess what? Your body does kind of compensate and find a way of making that sound for you. So really what he's saying is just imagine it and eventually it will happen. But for the average player who is, an enthusiastic hobbyist, I know that word triggers some people, but sorry, enthusiastic, doesn't do it fully for a living saxophonist, that's not necessarily going to help, is it? So then we have pages of overtone exercises, okay? And just before we get there, there's more interesting information which I've highlighted. So remember, it's the mind that gives the order. Diaphragm, embouchure, etc. will carry it out only when it is clearly given by the mind. The activity of the mind must precede that of the bodily organs, all right? So that's going back to his point about you have to think it first. And he does actually say, in regards to these overtones, but even for a student who does not aim to play a single note above top F, in other words, you don't even want to play altissimo, all these, there's no better single exercise to develop tone production and intonation than the playing of a few overtones every day. Absolutely agree, 100%. Overtones are the ultimate tone exercise, and they really develop your voicing, and they are absolutely imperative if you're going to be good at saxophone. That is why I always tell people every day to do my tone matching overtones exercise. I'll put a link in the description for that video. Right, then we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 whole pages of overtone exercises, which are great overtone exercises. Now, it's not until page 15 of the book that you get the first note written above F sharp. And it's actually as part of the overtone series of a low C fingering. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's like this. Here's low C. Now, keeping the same fingering, you can play the overtone series. So that's an altissimo G for alto, which is the first altissimo note we get in the whole book by page 15. Right, then the overtone exercises go on, and there are many different overtone exercises of various levels of difficulty. Okay, then we get to that famous page 19 that I told you about, which has got the list of fingerings for altissimo, and it goes right up to double C. Now, some people... Actually, let me just read this bit first, because Rascher says, these fingerings are practical on all sizes and makes of saxophones. My chief aim has been to find fingerings that are not too complicated, adjoin each other in a reasonable manner, and produce perfect intonation. Now, it just so happens that since 1941, and with different saxophones and through trial and error, most people have developed completely different fingerings from these ones. But I have tried them all, and, you know, they do work, but they're just not the ones that generally people have now settled on. Maybe it's because of different instruments and slightly different bores and, you know, tone hole configurations and different mouthpieces and reeds and all that stuff that we have now, that most people don't really use any of these fingerings. Or very few of them, let's just say. Now, here's Rascher's caveat, all right? Many a player has doomed himself to failure by neglecting or omitting the exercises on the preceding pages. That's the preceding 18 pages. If so, he deems them either a waste of paper or he believes that he does not need all this preparation. So there is actually that caveat. You know, if you haven't done all the huge amount of tone and overtone exercises in the preceding 18 pages, you won't be able to produce these altissimo notes. However, if you do want to produce these altissimo notes, and by the way, it goes from the fingerings page straight into multiple pages of altissimo exercises with no description of how you should produce these altissimo notes. Remember, what he really says is, imagine the note in your head, use the fingering I've got there, and on a subconscious level, your body will produce it. My experience is that for most people, that is a forlorn hope, and they just give up because they can't do it. Because they go to play, let's say in altissimo A, and instead of getting, they get the famous donkey noise. Now that is because there is a lot more to this equation than you might imagine. And if you can't somehow magically work it out subconsciously, you're going to struggle because there's a lot of stuff at play. So this is where Altissimo education started in 1941 with genius saxophonist Rascher, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. And by the way, just for the record, there is then one, two pages of Altissimo exercises. And if you want Altissimo exercises, just take any book you've already got and put octave above it. As simple as that. So 2 pages of that, and then the final 2 pages of the book are called Scales in Natural Overtones. It's back to overtones, and it's doing overtone scales, right? Which also go up into the Altissimo. Then that's it. There's 3 pages of that. And then the rest of the book is the next German translation. So, if you have not got this book, Top Tones for the Saxophone, let me tell you, if you're looking to be able to play Altissimo and you can't currently do it, you won't find out how to do it in this book, so don't waste your money. That doesn't mean that the book is useless. Before I get a volley of hate from the internet, the book is actually very helpful, but not if you want to learn how to do Altissimo. Now, what happens is in the next generation of saxophone education, people started to give you certain instructions about how to do it. Okay, this is what I call the second wave of Altissimo instruction, and generally it revolves around these things: push your jaw forward more than you normally do, into the thicker heart of the reed. Use slightly more embouchure pressure, and these 2 things are actually completely correct. That is exactly what you do. But then, the common instruction that you get, and over there I've got a massive stack of books at Altissimo, and they're full of this instruction. Make an E vowel shape, so you arch your tongue in your mouth to create a narrow channel, and it's usually accompanied by the instruction that this constriction at the top of your mouth will increase the airflow and you'll get Altissimo notes, all right? That is the sort of generally received instructions about how to get Altissimo. This may or may not help you, okay? So despite what the actual truth is of how you get Altissimo notes, these instructions may or may not help you, but quite often they don't help people. Now, let's talk about the third wave of education on how you play Altissimo and saxophone, which has evolved in the last 25 years, but unfortunately almost every saxophone educator has just either not come across it or conveniently ignored it. And that is this weighty tome by he's Dr. Mark Watkins, okay? Now, he was a special guest in our Inner Circle membership, and he has written this book called From the Inside Out, an in-depth resource for the development of saxophone sound. Now, what happens? Now, look at the size of this book. You want to know how to play Altissimo and every other kind of facet of voicing and saxophone? Here it is. And guess what? There's photos, there's clear instructions, and there's assessments of the actual facts of the matter. There are embouchure pressure readings. There are measurements how far the reed has gone in. There are cameras inside people's mouths. There are what's called fluoroscopy, which is like a live X-ray of where people's tongues, throats, larynxes are. So finally, we've actually got the answers, and we've had it for a while. But I'll be the first to admit, okay, this book is pretty heavy reading. It's a bit sciencey, and it's what Rascher was saying. You know, if I told you exactly what to do, you wouldn't be able to do it. You just need to imagine it and then do it. However, I personally think that this third wave of education is really valuable for some people if you can't do it. And guess what? It turns out that as you go higher into the Altissimo, do you know what your tongue does? Like, he studied all these proficient saxophonists playing Altissimo, and almost without exception, everybody does the same thing. Your tongue does not arch into an E formation, narrowing the channel in the top of your mouth. It's quite the opposite. Your tongue gets lower, and you expand the soft palate of the back of your mouth. You expand the back of your throat. I like to say it's almost like you gotta imagine you've got whole orange in your mouth. You know, like inside your mouth, if you expanded it as much as you can, that's more like what's going on with Altissimo. And guess what? The airstream doesn't get faster when you narrow the channel between the top of your mouth and your arched tongue. Well, it does for that little bit, then it goes back to normal. And it's all irrelevant anyway, because the gap between the reed and the mouthpiece is so small that anything you do in your mouth does not affect airspeed at the mouthpiece tip. I'm not saying what you do inside your mouth doesn't affect other stuff, but it doesn't affect airspeed. And guess what? Bombshell, Altissimo notes use slower air than low notes. So there you go. You know, blow faster, this like arch the tongue, it's actually all complete rubbish. So the point is, I'm trying to synthesize the best of the traditional knowledge with the best of the new information about what's really going on. And actually later this year, little spoiler alert for you, I'm going to be bringing out my new course, which is going to be called Altissimo Mastery. And that's going to be super exciting. So you better watch out for that later this year. So in the meantime, if you are interested in learning how to play Altissimo, I've got some great resources for you. Go to the description or just watch in a second when this video recommendation comes up. I've made a whole video about Altissimo explaining all this stuff in great detail. I've even got a lab coat on. And it's a bunch of myth busting, really explaining how you do Altissimo, all the stuff that you will not find in here or any of those other books I've got sitting over there. So I hope you enjoy that. Now, in the meantime, if you enjoy the channel, please go and check out my free Saxophone Success Masterclass. You can see the link there. And like I said, inside the Inner Circle membership, which by the way, you get a free trial, definitely worth joining because it's awesome. The best place to be if you're a keen saxophonist. Inside the membership, we've got a replay of a guest session I did with Dr. Mark Watkins, who wrote this book. Honestly, the information inside this is game-changing for every saxophone player, but it's so heavy going that you kind of need me to interpret it for you because I kind of simplify what he's saying a bit. However, we interview him and he goes all through the way that you actually do create Altissimo, hard facts instead of hunches and actual misdirects. So there you go. That's why, whoa, that's going to be an outtake. I might just keep it in the main video. That is why Top Tones for Saxophone may not be the ticket if you want to learn Altissimo. I know this is a real ranty video and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate because, you know, the Top Tones Bro Brigade are going to be after me. Anyway, until next time, make sure that you practice hard, practice smart, and enjoy your music. And if you go and check out my Altissimo video, you'll be able to play your Altissimo. Where, that's the wrong page. It's not until you get to page 9. Outtake. Fingerings chart that I got. I wish it wasn't so bright. That you get the famous fingering